My name is Elena Vasquez. I'm 30 years old. And the night my father made me a joke on Facebook, I was standing in my bedroom with one hand on a half-zip suitcase and the other around my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. His post went up at 8:14 p.m. The 30-year-old leech is finally gone. No more cooking her meals. By 8:20 it had exploded. More than 1,000 likes, laughing reactions from neighbors. Someone I'd known since middle school commented about how I cried at 25 when McDonald's didn't hire me. A side-by-side photo of my room before and after they ripped everything out. A caption about turning my pigsty into a cave for a real adult. My brother tagged his friends and wrote, "Warning, this is your future if you date dead weight." 32 comments, every one of them trying to make me small enough to fit inside the version of me they'd been selling for years. I read each one slowly, then I did something that confused all of them later. I didn't argue. I didn't cry in the comments. I didn't beg them to take it down. I screenshotted every post, every caption, every tag, every laughing emoji. Then I liked each one. After that, I sealed my last box, carried it past the kitchen, where nobody bothered to look ashamed, and walked out with a smile they mistook for weakness. What none of them understood was that I had spent years learning how people expose themselves when they think you have no power. And once people show you exactly who they are in public, you never have to guess again. Before I tell you what he said next and what happened after I drove away, tell me what time it is where you are right now and where are you watching from? I really want to see how far this story reaches. The funniest part was that my family truly believed their own story about me. They had repeated it for so long it had hardened into family folklore. Elena sleeps late, stares at screens all night, doesn't have a real job, wastes her life in sweatshirts, barely leaves the house, contributes nothing, eats everybody else's food, acts too sensitive, and somehow still thinks she deserves respect. What they never cared enough to ask was what I was actually doing in that room with blackout curtains and 3 monitors glowing until dawn. I worked nights for a healthcare cybersecurity firm in Columbus handling breach response for hospital systems across 3 states. When ransomware locked up an emergency department at 2 a.m., my team was the one on the bridge call. When patient records were exposed, I was the one tracing intrusion points, documenting timelines, talking nervous administrators through containment steps, and writing reports precise enough to survive lawsuits. It paid well, better than anyone in my family imagined. But I kept my career quiet because silence was easier than explaining tech to people who had already decided I was a punchline. My father ran a struggling motorcycle repair shop behind our house. My mother floated between part-time jobs and long stretches of resentment. And my younger brother Kevin treated adulthood like a prank somebody else would clean up. Years earlier, after my grandmother Ruth got sick, I was the one who took her to oncology appointments, managed her medications, and sat beside her during the nights when she was too proud to admit she was afraid. Nobody else had the patience. Dad said hospitals made him uncomfortable. Mom said she couldn't stand the smell. Kevin said he had a life. Grandma noticed everything. She noticed who showed up, who disappeared, and who only called when they needed money. After she died, people assumed the legal paperwork would sort itself out the way it always had in our family, through yelling, entitlement, and the loudest person grabbing whatever they could. They were wrong. There were documents in a fireproof box with my name on them, and signatures nobody bothered to ask about because they never imagined paperwork could matter more than volume. I stayed in that house longer than I should have for one reason. I had promised Grandma I would keep things stable until I could leave cleanly. So I covered gaps, mortgage shortfalls, insurance renewals, utility balances, quiet emergencies. I did it without applause, without gratitude, and eventually without love. By the time Dad made that post, I had already signed a lease for a converted brick loft 40 minutes away, set up movers, transferred my mail, and decided that whatever happened next, I would not defend myself to people who needed me broken in order to feel bigger. They thought they were celebrating the eviction of a burden. In reality, they were cheering the exit of the person holding the floor up underneath them. And none of them had enough sense to ask, What happens to a house when the beam you keep kicking finally moves? I got to my new place just after midnight. It was on the third floor of an old hardware warehouse converted into apartments. Exposed brick, steel-framed windows, floors that creaked in honest ways, not accusing ones. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I set my keys on the counter, turned on the kitchen light, and stood there in the silence long enough to realize I had never actually lived in a place where quiet felt safe. No one yelling from another room. No sarcastic comments tossed like darts if I left a cup in the sink. No television blasting conspiracy videos at full volume. No footsteps outside my bedroom door followed by, "You still in there?" I should have cried from relief. Instead, I opened Facebook again. Dad's post had climbed higher. Neighbors were tagging cousins. Former classmates were dropping in with fake concern dressed as humor. One woman from church wrote, "Tough love works. Birds have to leave the nest eventually." Another added, "At least she's gone before 40. Kevin had created a second post from his own account, using an old photo of me in oversized pajamas carrying groceries from the car. National Geographic. Rare footage of the basement daughter in the wild. Hundreds of reactions. I screenshotted that one too. Then I opened the locked folder on my laptop and saved everything in 3 separate places. People love calling cruelty a joke when consequences finally arrive. Evidence makes jokes less flexible. The next morning, while sunlight cut across bare walls I still hadn't decorated, I made coffee and opened the spreadsheet I'd maintained for almost 4 years. Every household account tied to my name or login credentials was listed there. The mortgage portal for the Vasquez house, the commercial liability policy for my father's shop, the water account, gas, internet, county property tax reminders, the payment plan I had negotiated when my father fell behind on business taxes, and the cheap fleet insurance add-on Kevin had begged me to set up when he started doing pickup jobs for the shop, and then forgot existed because forgetting things was one of his core talents. I stared at the numbers and felt something colder than anger settle into place. Not rage, not revenge in the dramatic movie sense, just math. I was not about to sabotage anything illegally, and I didn't need to. All I had to do was stop rescuing adults who had built their identities around humiliating the person saving them. So I changed passwords that were mine. I removed my bank account from every auto draft. I emailed the insurance broker to state that I would no longer be acting as the communication contact for any Vasquez family personal or business policies. I notified the mortgage servicer that future notices should go to the occupying parties listed on file. Then I scheduled a meeting with the attorney who had handled my grandmother's estate. Not because I was uncertain, but because I was finally ready to do what should have been done months earlier. By lunch, Mom had posted a new photo. My empty room repainted dark gray, a leather recliner shoved into the corner, a mini fridge beside it. "Look how much better this space is without chaos," she wrote. "Peace at last." Under it, Dad commented, "Best renovation we ever did." I nearly laughed. Renovation? That word stayed with me all afternoon. Maybe because that was all I had been doing for years. Renovating myself in secret. Tearing out rotten beliefs, rewiring the panic, replacing every cracked thing they called my personality with something load-bearing. Around 4 p.m., my email pinged with the first automated warning. Commercial liability policy pending lapse. Payment not received. At 4:11, another. Mortgage draft unsuccessful. Please update payment method. I sat back and watched the screen. For years, those alerts had made my stomach drop because I knew I would have to fix them before Dad noticed, before Mom spiraled, before Kevin swore he would handle it later and then disappeared. That afternoon, for the first time, I felt no urgency at all. Only a question that had been waiting a long time to be asked. If your family only values you when you are useful, what exactly are they mourning when you finally leave? The person or the labor? 2 days later, I sat across from Patricia Hayes, the estate attorney my grandmother trusted more than most blood relatives. Her office smelled like paper, coffee, and old walnut furniture, the kind of room where feelings lose arguments to signatures. She slid a thick folder across the desk and tapped the tab with my name on it. "You've delayed this longer than necessary," she said, not unkindly. "I know why, but delay doesn't change the terms." She was right. Grandma Ruth had owned the house outright long before my father ever pretended it was his kingdom. When Dad's shop nearly collapsed 8 years earlier after a bad expansion loan, Grandma refinanced one of her other properties to save the business, then placed both the family house and the repair garage land into a living trust. She had watched her son blow through second chances his entire adult life, and decided sentiment was a dangerous thing to build legal plans around. In the trust documents, she named me successor trustee and primary decision-maker the day after her death. Dad and Mom were granted occupancy of the house and a reduced-use arrangement for the shop property, but only under conditions: maintain the property, remain current on utilities and taxes, avoid conduct that would jeopardize the trust's assets or harass the acting trustee, and acknowledge in writing that their right to stay there was a revocable license, not ownership. They signed it, every page, probably without reading because reading was for other people and consequences were always tomorrow's problem. After Grandma died, I kept things running because I couldn't stomach the idea of her home turning into another Vasquez disaster. Patricia helped me structure everything cleanly: the mortgage-related escrow issue, the taxes, the insurance, the shop compliance forms. I handled the practical side. My family took my silence for submission because they had never met a woman in their own house who understood leverage. Patricia turned her monitor toward me and showed me the trust clause I had avoided invoking. Public harassment, defamation, or targeted humiliation of the trustee by an occupying beneficiary constitutes hostile interference and may trigger immediate review, termination of occupancy, and acceleration of property transition remedies. My father's post had not just been cruel, it had been reckless, publicly naming me, portraying me as unstable and dependent, inviting ridicule, and creating a documented pattern of harassment tied directly to the acting trustee of the property. Patricia didn't even have to stretch. "The screenshots are enough," she said. "Combined with non-payment notices and prior history, we can issue formal termination and begin transition of both occupancy and business use rights. I need your authorization." I remember looking at my own reflection in the dark computer screen for a second before answering. There I was, 30 years old, hair pulled back, no makeup, still in the plain black sweater I wore on overnight calls, looking less like a victim than anyone who knew me would have believed. "Do it," I said. Patricia nodded once, as if I had finally spoken a language she trusted. She drafted the notices that afternoon. 30 days to vacate the house, immediate suspension of the shop's below-market property use arrangement pending proof of insurance, financial compliance, and independent lease qualification. Translation: my father could no longer coast on Grandma's mercy while insulting the person administering it. We also prepared a separate demand regarding online harassment: removal of defamatory posts, preservation of evidence, and no direct contact outside counsel for matters concerning the trust. Patricia asked whether I wanted to leave room for family mediation. I told her no, not yet. Maybe not ever. She didn't argue. By evening, certified notices were queued, the process server was scheduled, and my phone had started buzzing with the sort of energy families mistake for love when they sense resources slipping out of reach. It began with Aunt Barbara, who had been suspiciously absent while Dad's post was collecting laughs. She left a voicemail with that syrupy tone certain relatives use when they want your compliance gift wrapped as concern. "Honey, call me back. Your dad is upset and your mother is confused. I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. I replayed that phrase twice and almost admired it. There is real talent in watching a public humiliation unfold, saying nothing, and later describing the consequences as confusion. I didn't return the call. An hour later, Kevin texted, "What did you do? Dad says some lawyer letter came. If this is a joke, knock it off." 5 minutes after that, "Answer me then. You can't kick us out of our own house." That message sat on my screen longer than the rest. Their own house. They had believed that so completely. The post, the mockery, the chest-thumping certainty. None of it would have happened if they had ever considered the possibility that I was not powerless. That was the thing about contempt. It makes people sloppy. It teaches them to assume the person they use has no private life, no documents, no exit, no plan. But contempt has terrible eyesight. It can't see what's coming until the headlights are already in the driveway. The process server reached the house on a Thursday at 10:17 a.m. I know the exact time because Patricia's office sent confirmation. And because at 10:19 my phone lit up like a fire alarm. Dad called first, then Mom, then Kevin, then Aunt Barbara, then Dad again, then Mom 3 times in a row, followed by a text that simply said, "Elena, pick up right now." I let the calls ring out while I joined a breach containment call for a rural hospital whose scheduling system had just been hit with malware. There was something almost poetic about calmly instructing a panicked IT director to isolate compromised endpoints, while my own family was finally being forced to understand what happens when a system keeps abusing its most important safeguard. At 11:03, Kevin left a voicemail so full of rage he sounded younger than he had at 15. "You psycho. Dad says this letter says the house isn't ours. What did you tell people? Mom's crying. Call me before I come over there." I saved that one too. At 11:22, Mom switched strategies. Her text came through in fragments, like desperation trying on different masks. "We didn't know. Then your father was joking. Then how could you do this to family?" I stared at the screen and thought about all the times those same people had told me I was too emotional, too dramatic, too soft, too sensitive to survive the real world. Funny how quickly my feelings became valid the minute they collided with a property line. Dad's first voicemail arrived at 11:40. He sounded less furious than stunned, which somehow made it sharper. "Elena, call me. Patricia Hayes is saying the trust owns the house and the garage lot. That can't be right. Your grandmother would never cut me out. There's been some mistake." There had been no mistake. Grandma hadn't cut him out. She had documented him accurately. She gave him chance after chance, then built guardrails around the damage he liked to call bad luck. At noon, Aunt Barbara called from a different number, and this time I answered. She opened with a sigh heavy enough to qualify as performance. "Sweetheart, everyone's upset. Your mom is beside herself. Your dad feels betrayed." I looked at the city skyline beyond my apartment window and asked the only question I cared about. Was he betrayed when he posted about me to thousands of people? She hesitated just long enough to expose herself. "Well, that was unkind," she said. "But family says things. This legal route feels extreme. Family says things." There it was again, the family discount for cruelty. The sacred exemption that turns humiliation into personality and boundaries into attack. "No," I said. "Extreme was watching all of you laugh while they humiliated me publicly in a house I was legally protecting." She didn't speak for a second. Then came the guilt script. "Your mother isn't well. Marcos's blood pressure is through the roof. Kevin says the shop may have to close if this property issue isn't fixed fast." Fixed? As if I had broken something functional, instead of stepping back from a machine that ran on my silence. Then they should have thought about that before they invited the internet to spit on me, I said and ended the call. That afternoon, Patricia sent copies of the served documents with her notes. Dad's shop had another problem now. Because I was no longer the contact person, and the liability policy had officially lapsed, he couldn't operate legally on the property under the trust's reduced-use arrangement. If he wanted to keep the business alive, he needed proof of independent insurance, updated permits, and enough money to sign a real market-rate lease somewhere else. He had none of those things ready because for years, I had quietly prevented small negligence from turning into public collapse. By 4 p.m., word had begun moving through our town the way it always does. Through half-whispered phone calls, a barber chair, a grocery line, a church parking lot. The repair customers noticed the garage doors stayed shut longer than usual. Dad's Facebook post was still up, but the comments had turned strange. A few people had heard enough to start asking why a supposedly useless daughter seemed connected to trust documents, property notices, and a lawyer. One woman wrote, "Maybe don't mock people online when you don't know whose name is on the paperwork." Dad deleted that comment. Then another entire post disappeared. Too late. Screenshots are forever, and the internet is only funny until it starts keeping receipts. By dinner time, I had 26 missed calls and more than 40 messages. Some were begging, some accusing, some trying to bulldoze me back into my old role. Kevin alternated between insults and panic. Mom kept insisting she never meant it that way. Dad stopped pretending he was confused and started demanding we handle this privately, which is a phrase controlling people use when public consequences suddenly feel unfair. I ordered Thai food, ate on my couch in sweatpants, and listened to voicemail after voicemail stack up from the same people who had not believed my life contained anything worth respecting. At 9:14 p.m., Mom left the message that finally made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because it revealed everything. She was crying hard enough to slur her words. "Elena, please. We can't lose the house. Your father says the shop is done if we lose that lot. Kevin says he can't make his truck payment if the shop shuts down. You know we need you. Please stop this. You know we need you. Not we're sorry. Not we were cruel. Not you didn't deserve that. Need." That was the first honest word any of them had used. I agreed to one meeting, and only because Patricia insisted it would strengthen the record if I offered a final formal chance for discussion in counsel's presence. We met the next Monday in her conference room, not at the house. I refused to walk back into that place as a daughter expected to absorb emotion and clean up the mess. If they wanted access to me now, they could sit beneath fluorescent lights and face the version of me they had spent years pretending didn't exist. Dad arrived first, angrier than dignified, wearing the same leather jacket he used whenever he needed to feel larger than his circumstances. Mom came in behind him with red-rimmed eyes and a tissue clenched in one hand. Kevin slouched last, jaw tight, still carrying the kind of hostility men use when fear makes them feel childish. Aunt Barbara came too, because there is always one relative who believes every family collapse requires an audience, and a mediator nobody asked for. Patricia was already seated when I entered. I took the chair across from them, set a black folder on the table, and watched all four faces shift at once. Surprise, then discomfort, then the dawning realization that I was not there to be talked over. Dad started before anyone invited him. "This has gone far enough. Whatever legal games you and Patricia are playing, they stopped today. You embarrassed this family." I almost admired the nerve. "You posted me for public sport," I said. "You invited people to laugh at me. You tagged my life, my room, my adulthood, and you called it celebration. Don't use the word embarrassed, like you don't know where it started." Mom burst in then, voice trembling. "We were upset. You just left." "No," I said, and slid the first sheet from my folder toward them. "I left after years of being used and insulted in the house I was legally maintaining for you." The first page was a printout of Dad's Facebook post. The second was Mom's before and after photo with her caption about peace at last. The third was Kevin's future dating warning. Then came the comments. I had highlighted the worst lines. I read them aloud one by one, not theatrically, just clearly. The room changed with each sentence. Cruelty sounds different when you take it out of a screen and make people hear it in adult air. Aunt Barbara tried to interrupt. Patricia raised one hand and shut her down without a word. Then I laid out the payment records. Mortgage deficits I had covered, insurance renewals I had handled, tax notices I had resolved, utility arrears I had paid, permit reminders for the shop, the spreadsheet summary. For years of quiet labor translated into columns and dates. Dad stared at the pages like they were written in a language he had always mocked and suddenly needed. Kevin went pale around the mouth. Mom kept whispering, "I didn't know. I didn't know." As if ignorance were somehow a defense instead of a confession. Finally, Patricia spoke. Her voice was calm in the way surgeons must sound when explaining the next step. She summarized the trust, the occupancy license, the revocation conditions, the harassment clause, the insurance lapse, the property transition options, and the timeline for vacating if no negotiated exit was reached. Dad tried bluster first. My mother would never do this. Patricia slid a notarized amendment across the table in Grandma Ruth's careful signature. She did, she said. Specifically because she anticipated this pattern of behavior. He slumped back then, and for the first time in my life, I saw him without the shield of volume. Just a man who had mistaken dependence for authority. Kevin looked at me with something uglier than anger. Humiliation. So what? You've been secretly acting better than us this whole time. That question told me everything. In his mind, competence was arrogance if it came from me. No, I said. I've been secretly preventing your life from collapsing while you all called me useless. Mom reached for the tissue box like it was a life raft. Elena, we said stupid things. Families fight. You can't destroy us over a Facebook post. I'm not destroying you over a Facebook post, I said. I'm refusing to keep saving people who publicly degrade me. There was a long silence after that. Not empty, structural, the kind that arrives when truth finally outweighs performance. Dad's voice when it came again was lower. What do you want? Not, how do we make this right? Not, what did we do to you? Just the transactional bottom line. I had expected that. I want distance, I said. I want the property vacated on schedule. I want no more direct contact outside what the attorney permits. I want every copied post, comment, and repost removed. Not because erasing them changes anything, but because you don't get to keep using my humiliation as entertainment. I want you to understand that I am done funding your disrespect. Mom started sobbing in earnest, shoulders shaking. Dad's eyes went wet, though whether from shame, rage, or pure panic, I couldn't tell. Kevin snorted, swore under his breath, and looked away. Aunt Barbara finally spoke, soft and wounded. The way people do when they've realized the moral center of the story is not where they wanted it to be. Elena, are you really going to let this be the end? I looked at her, and thought about every family dinner where I was the butt of the joke. Every time my work hours were mocked. Every time my room was treated like evidence of my failure instead of a command center built around a job none of them respected because they could not see it. No, I said. This isn't the end. This is the part where you all finally live in the truth you created. Then I stood up, took a single house key from my wallet, the spare I had kept because some part of me once believed responsibility was love, and placed it on the conference table in front of my father. Grandma gave me that house to protect, I said. I did, just not in the way you expected. I left before any of them could turn their tears into negotiation. In the hallway outside, my hands shook so hard I had to lean against the wall for a second. Not because I regretted it, but because some victories hurt on the way out. People love to say blood is thicker than water, but nobody talks enough about how thick guilt becomes when a family has spent years kneading it into your spine. Walking away from strangers is easy. Walking away from people who taught you your pain was disloyal takes muscle. I had that muscle now. They just hadn't noticed me building it. The calls kept coming for 3 more days, then slowed, then changed shape. Dad switched from demands to bargaining. Mom moved from crying to memory, texting old photos and recipes as if nostalgia could function like a locksmith. Kevin went silent after one last message calling me cold, then resurfaced through a cousin to ask whether I would at least help them find something. I didn't answer any of it. Patricia handled the property communication. The posts disappeared, though not before enough screenshots circulated that people in town quietly revised their opinions. I didn't do a public takedown. I didn't post a triumphant thread. I didn't need to. The truth had already walked into the room wearing dates, signatures, and consequences. 30 days later, the house was empty. The garage lot reverted fully to trust management, and I chose not to renew any Vasquez family use arrangement. I sold one and used adjacent parcel Grandma had included in the trust and used part of the proceeds to establish a small emergency tech training fund at the community college in her name for adult students rebuilding their lives, especially women changing careers later than other people thought they should. That felt more like justice than shouting ever could. The family house itself I kept for a while, not as a home to return to, but as proof that survival sometimes looks like legal paperwork, boundaries, and the courage to stop translating cruelty into love. I walked through it once after they left. My old room, Dad's precious man cave, still smelled faintly of fresh paint and stale ego. I stood in the doorway, looked at the recliner they dragged in to celebrate my absence, and felt nothing that resembled loss, just clarity. Some people think revenge is screaming louder. Sometimes it is simply letting people experience life without access to the person they underestimated. My father let everyone mock me online because he believed public humiliation would freeze me in the role he needed. The dependent daughter, the family joke, the one who absorbed disrespect and kept the lights on. 2 weeks later, when the calls started pouring in, he learned the difference between someone who is weak and someone who has been patient. Those are not the same thing. If there's a lesson in this story, it's not that money wins or paperwork matters more than family. It's that respect is not optional just because the target shares your last name. If the people closest to you only feel comfortable when you are diminished, then your growth will always look like betrayal to them. Let it. You do not owe anyone lifelong access to you in exchange for being related. You do not have to audition for basic decency inside your own bloodline. And sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is stop rescuing the people who built their self-esteem on your silence. I used to think leaving would make me the villain of the family story. Maybe it did. But I'd rather be the villain in their version than disappear in mine. So tell me this. If the people who raised you only loved the version of you that stayed small, would you keep shrinking to keep the peace? Or would you finally let them learn how expensive your absence really is? From my perspective, this story is not really about revenge. It is about self-worth, boundaries, and the painful moment when someone finally stops accepting disrespect from the very people who should have loved them most. What stayed with me is how often families mistake control for care and silence for weakness. Elena's strength was not in hurting anyone back, but in recognizing her value and refusing to keep saving people who only appreciated her when she was suffering quietly. To me, that is the real lesson. Sometimes walking away is not cruelty. It is courage.